Hello everybody and welcome back to Zooming into Scripture. So today I want to start a series of videos on a topic relevant to a lot of discussion today. It's often said these days that Christianity has brought a lot more harm to the world than good. Now before going into depth to explore Christianity's effects on the world today, I want to say that the point of this video isn't trying to prove Christianity. So don't run in the comments and say this doesn't prove anything, because that's not my goal. My goal is to show the impacts and value Christianity has ingrained into our culture and the world to the point that we don't even realize what life was like before we had these values. There's too many to go over in one video without making the video too long. So if you like this video or want to see the other parts to this video, make sure to like and subscribe so you'll be notified when the next video comes out. Alright, so let's start on a lighter note before getting into an evil practice that Christianity brought condemnation and changes to in the second half of this video. So firstly, let's get into modern science. We often hear today how Christianity is a science stopper that holds scientific progress back, but nothing could be further from the truth. Christianity provided a framework for scientific inquiry to grow. I'll start with some quotes from people way smarter than me regarding this subject. These theories formed the basis of Galileo's work and reached perfection with the mathematical principles of natural philosophy by Sir Isaac Newton in 1687. Newton himself was explicit about the religious roots of his work, as were Johannes Kepler, René Descartes, and Robert Boyle, among many others. Over the following centuries, their new kind of science grew into modern physics, chemistry, and biology, something that could never have happened in ancient Greek or Islamic worlds. Of course, we need to remember that medieval Christians were not deliberately trying to make progress towards science as we know it today. They were simply studying God's creation so that they would become better theologians and Christians. Generations of historians and sociologists have discovered many ways in which Christians, Christian beliefs, and Christian institutions played crucial roles in fashioning the tenets, methods, and institutions of what became modern science. They found that some forms of Christianity provided the motivation to study nature systematically. And C.S. Lewis notes this: men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a legislator. Intelligibility is an important presupposition that made science what it is today, and as Stephen Meyer says, one of those key ideas was the idea of intelligibility, that nature is intelligible. There's an order and design that can be understood and discerned by the scientist because nature is the product of a rational mind, namely the mind of God, and that same mind or creator who made nature with that rational order built into it made us and our reason so that we would perceive and understand that reason that he built into nature. And I'll quote my last quote from Oxford historian John Henley Brooke, who wrote, "When natural philosophers referred to laws of nature, they weren't glibly choosing that metaphor. Laws were the result of legislation by an intelligent deity. Thus philosopher René Descartes insisted that he was discovering the laws that God put into nature." The Christian framework doesn't stop science, it encouraged it. As Kepler wrote, "I had the intention of becoming a theologian, but now see how God is, by my endeavors, also glorified in astronomy." And Copernicus said, oh man, hopefully I said that right, "To know the mighty works of God must be a pleasing and acceptable mode of worship to the Most High." So the rise of modern science was heavily influenced and encouraged by Christianity. So we have Christianity to thank for when we think about modern science as we know it today, and it wouldn't have developed if it wasn't for Christianity. A lot more can be said on this subject, but I want to get to the next important impact of Christianity on the world. Christian values brought something very important to the world with Jesus 2,000 years ago that brought condemnation and solutions to this ancient evil practice, and it started with how Jesus treated women and what the Bible teaches of human value before God. We take this for granted so much today because it has been so ingrained in our psyche, but in the ancient world, humans were not treated this way. And we will look at cases today where Christian ethics aren't widespread, and these practices are still common to a degree. In ancient Rome and the ancient world as a whole, unwanted babies or children with birth defects would be abandoned in a practice called exposure, or just killed. This practice was extremely common in the ancient world and in Rome where Christianity was growing. Paul Offit, a non-Christian professor of pediatrics at University of Pennsylvania, calls Christianity the single greatest breakthrough against child abuse in history. He explains at the time of Jesus' life, child abuse, as noted by one historian, was the crying vice of the Roman Empire. Infanticide was common, abandonment was common, children were property, no different than slaves, but Jesus stood up for children, cared about them, when those around him typically didn't. Taking their cues from Jesus, the early Christians collected the babies abandoned by others, and to everyone's surprise, the Roman Empire Constantine became a Christian. Legal protections for women and children started to come into place. Also, baby girls were unfortunately more likely to be victims of abandonment and infanticide. We've even seen this in modern times in countries without a Christian foundation, such as China and India, where selective abortion has caused a huge gender gap, with China having some 31 million more men than women, and India having about 1,000 males for every 900 females. It was through Christian values, following Jesus' example, that these practices were starting to be condemned and changed. Britannica.com notes this: the letters of James says, "Religion that is pure and undefiled before God is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction." Widows formed a special group in the church congregations and were asked to help with nursing care and other service obligations as long as they did not need the help and care themselves. They had founded orphanages during the 4th century, and the monasteries took over the task in the Middle Ages. They also fought against the practice of abandoning unwanted children and established founding hospitals. Christianity changed how the ancient world viewed infanticide, exposure, children with deformities, and the value men and women share as equal bearers of God's image. The world today isn't perfect in these areas, but Christianity drastically improved the conditions for the vulnerable. These are just 2 ways in which Christianity has changed the world for the better, and there can be a lot more said about each subject, and there's a lot more to say in future videos. So if you're interested in seeing those videos, make sure to subscribe. I'll be coming out with more videos on more ways Christianity has changed the world for the better.